Hello everybody and welcome back to another deck tech idea. Today I'm featuring Nekusar, the Mindrazer. He's a 5 mana 2/4 and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. But whenever an opponent draws a card, Nekusar, the Mindrazer, deals 1 damage to that player. We want to enable additional card draw engines for ourselves and for our opponents, but we will punish our opponents for drawing additional cards. We are most likely going to win by accumulating a lot of cards in our hand and then using a wheel effect to deal a bunch of damage with Nekusar. Some of those wheel effects are Jace's Archivist, 3 mana 2/2, and for 1 blue and tapping it, each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. You can also add some untap artifacts into this deck to use this ability several times in a turn. Whispering Madness, 4 mana sorcery, and each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. It also has Decipher mechanics, so you can encode it to Nekusar or to any other of your creatures to maybe recast the spell again. Markers of the Wheel, 3 mana 3/3, and for 2 mana tapping it and sacrificing it, each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. Dark Deal, 3 mana sorcery, each player discards all the cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards -1. Molten Psych, 3 mana sorcery, each player shuffles the cards from his or her hand into his or her library, then draws that many cards. If you have Metalcraft enabled, Molten Psych deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards that player has drawn this turn. This is a powerful, cheap wheel effect, which you can maybe use after another wheel effect to sling a bunch of damage together. And Windfall, 3 mana sorcery, each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. The sad thing about this deck is that players will most likely see how you are going to win. So let's play some more cards that punish our opponents for drawing cards. Fate Unraveler, 4 mana 3/4, and whenever an opponent draws a card, Fate Unraveler deals 1 damage to that player. Sheoldred the Apocalypse, 4 mana 4/5 Death Touch, and whenever we draw a card we gain 2 life, and whenever an opponent draws a card they lose 2 life. Orcish Bowmaster, 2 mana 1/1 with Flash, and when it enters the battlefield and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmaster deals 1 damage to any target, and then we amass Orcs 1. Underworld Dreams, 3 mana enchantment, and whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. Depending on your land base, it can be hard to play Underworld Dreams on curve, especially in a Grixis deck, but it is always worth mentioning that we are playing with 3 black on an enchantment as its costs, which is a great setup for many devotion mechanics out there. Cataract Parasite, 1 mana 1/1, and whenever an opponent draws a card, if you control a red permanent, you may have Cataract Parasite deal 1 damage to that player. Fevered Visions, 3 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. If the player is your opponent and has 4 or more cards in hand, Fevered Visions deals 2 damage to him or her. And now let's talk about how we enable more card draw for our opponents, but also for ourselves. Temple Bell, 3 mana artifact. Tap it so each player draws a card. What I like about this card is that you can simply wait until the end step before your turn to minimize the profit that your opponents have from this ability. Sazan, Perverter of Truth, 5 mana 6/5, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses 2 life and draws 2 cards. Font of Mythos, 4 mana artifact, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws 2 additional cards. Master of the Feast, 3 mana 5/5 flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent draws a card. Kami of the Crescent Moon, 2 mana 1/3, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Howling Mine, 2 mana artifact, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. You want to win more? You get it. Forced Fruition, 6 mana enchantment, and whenever an opponent plays a spell, that player draws 7 cards. You should make sure to have some protection up and have several damage dealing effects on the board to secure that this one kills your opponents. Peer into the Abyss, 7 mana sorcery. Target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life. Round up each time. Peer into the Abyss allows you to take a player out in no time, but you should also consider targeting yourself to find another win con. Phyrexia, 2 mana enchantment aura, an enchanted creature is Infect. This is extremely powerful because, as you can read from the second line of Nekusar, he is the one dealing 1 damage to that player. So if he has Infect, you don't have to reduce the total life total of your opponents, you only have to make them draw 10 cards to win with Infect. And last but not least, Ojer Axonial, Deepest Might, 4 mana 4/4 trample, and if a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ogier Axonil's power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ogier Axonil's power instead. When he dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. This is extremely powerful as Nekusar is a red source, and instead of dealing just 1 damage, you would deal 4 damage with Ogier Axonil on the field while your opponents draw a card. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I would play in Nekusar the Mindrazer. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I will say see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.